questions or no questions, we'd like to jump in right away. But first, what I'd like to do in the order of events is this. I'm going to introduce you to our four experts here. We have two really from private sector, two from public sector. And in case you are in the wrong room, what you came in to hear was the talk about the transformational power of science and technology in Asia, and within that, a bit about that very delicate balance that has to be struck between public sector, government, and private sector all along the way at every stage of development in each country. And it may be different at each stage of development in each country. So it gets very complicated, very difficult to get correct. We've had cases in the past where governments have tried to dictate, for example, picking a scientific winner and been dead wrong. And we've had cases where perhaps the government has taken no action to intervene and not been able to foster a strong science and technology base in their country. So what I'd like to do first is we would like to know what you're thinking. And you can change your mind. This is without prejudice here. And I'm going to show you a continuum, a spectrum. At this end of the spectrum is if you believe the government should really be very, very hands-off, totally hands-off when it comes to fostering science and technology industries in the country. And it could be your country, your home country, not necessarily this country. And this end of the spectrum is going to be you believe that government has a total role in determining the future of science and technology. Now, I'm not a moron. I know you're going to be somewhere in between, okay? So what I'd like you to do, though, is be fair, is to show me generally which bias you have. Is it going to be the bias to be laissez-faire and more hands-off government, more free market efficiency? Or is it going to be more, you need certain fostering, certain nurturing, certain protections, which will be this end. So the way we'll decide this, and these gentlemen will watch so they'll get an idea about your mindset, is let's start now by showing me your hands. If you have more of a bias toward feeling that government should take largely a hands-off role when it comes to fostering science and technology, raise your hand now. Okay? And by the way, there are no neutral parties in this. Okay, so bias, keep them up for a second. Great. Now, if you have a bias that you feel the government should have more of a hands-on role in fostering science and technology, show me now. So very interesting. You can see that there's a slight bias in this room to the two public sector gentlemen here. With that, what I'd like to do now is start with our very distinguished guests. And I would like to introduce you first to Minister Huan Gang, who is the Minister of Science and Technology of the People's Republic of China. Please join me in welcoming Minister Huan. And if you need translation, for those of you who don't understand Mandarin, you can wear your translator on channel 1 for English, other channels as you dial through. So Minister Huan will be speaking in Putonghua, I believe. 你会说普通话? 对, okay. Minister Huan, my first question to you is, since it's such a delicate balance to strike, how do you manage to do that effectively without crushing the entrepreneurial spirit where many new scientific ideas come from, and without having it so unfettered that nothing ever takes root and gains traction? How do you strike the balance?
我觉得呢，要达到这种平衡，大概政府要起到3个作用。第一个作用呢，首先是提供服务。我所说的提供服务，首先政府应该在教育上投资，培养出更多的创新型的人才。我所说的第二个，在服务上面的第二个呢，就是要建设公共性的服务的支撑的为技术开发的基础设施和试验平台。我说的第3个服务，政府应该制定政策，来帮助这些企业能够在税收政策上，能够在它的发展上面起到一些作用，比如说它取得贷款啊等等这一块。我讲到的第2个作用是政府要扶持，特别是对新兴企业的发展。 比如说在座的 private sector 里边有很多的是 IT 企业，比如说在健康事业上，比如说在环境事业上，比如说在能源和节约能源和发展新能源的事业上。我想说的第3点，政府要对企业的发展有一个引导的作用，特别是今天在中国，当工业化发展一定程度的时候，能源、资源、环境的制约瓶颈已经对我们的社会发展造成了一定的制约作用。在这样的情况下，政府提出来应对大气变化的气候变化的这样的政府行动计划，来引导我们的传统工业来进行开发节能和减排的技术，引导我们的新兴工业来开发新能源，比如说太阳能啊、风能的利用啊，比如说沼气的利用啊，生物就是智能的生物油的作用啊。政府的作用，我认为，首先是为企业提供服务；第二，在企业需要的时候给他以支持；第三，当社会需要的时候，政府应该引导企业来满足社会的需求。谢谢。
Thank you, Minister Wan. Let me ask, though, how do you know in accomplishing these goals of guiding and supporting, how do you know when you've gone too far or not far enough? And how do you bring in enough great scientific minds who are up to date so that you are not an out-of-date decision maker when it comes to striking that balance?
我们有2个比较明确的措施。第一个，我们认为在科学研究的时候，今天的题目叫 transfer， 是我成果转化。实际上，我个人认为，在成果产生的时候，就应该是大学、研究机构和企业紧密地结合在一起。所以，政府支持的科研项目，明确地确定了以企业为承担的主体，以学校和研究机构和企业紧密的结合来进行开发。我认为，这个同时呢，我们在发展高新科技，大家可以有机会也在大连参观一下它的高新科技园。我们在高新科技园里面有一个管理机构，他们为这些企业在瞬息万变的时候，当企业需要的话，就为它提供公共服务的平台，为它提供财政支持的中介，为它提供这个一些资源、能源方面的服务。Thank you.
So very much an incubator, as we said. I'd like to now introduce you to Dr. Kiyoshi Kurakawa, who is Science Advisor to the Prime Minister and, in Japan. Dr. Kurakawa, we have seen in Japan where in the past the government did have a view about picking winners in technology.
Right.
For example, back in the 80s, it was high-definition TV, Muse, I believe it was called,
right,
that really didn't work at all. So where does government go beyond its role in being effective, and where do you see it better striking its balance?
Right. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. At least in sort of preceding paradigm of mass production, market capture, standardization, and consumerism, and under that paradigm, Japan has done very well because that somehow fits to the Japanese psychology and mindset and society. You know, like conformity in a sense, but now world has changing very rapidly, and not only growing Asia, but IT technology really change is a sort of driving force for economic growth. Now, first is investing on education. Very important because you have to really create a human resource. But now remember, up to maybe 10 years ago, we are talking about human resource development because that you are seeing some of the industrial structure. But now more frequently, now we are using word human capital because personalizing or individual power may have a tremendous potential. Look at the Google and other things. But industrialized world was a different paradigm. So like, what kind of education is a key? Second, science and technology investment will be also very important, because through this investment, we also create a foundation of future generation of scientists and engineers. And again, innovative mind and creative mind, we have to nurture that. So that's another aspect of a different sort of way of investment on public, public investment and corporate investment, private sector. But third, as a policy-making process, it's very important also to think about prioritize this investment into either international identity of corporate or this nation, power of nation, or global society. Now, every policymaker and political leadership have to be accountable to the prioritize your own nation's need. For example, like aging society, poverty, and all the sort of conflict within your nation. You have to prioritize certain things in addition to economic growth as a whole. But also we have to pay attention to the global issues, global poverty and terrorism, because everybody knows unhappiness, what's happening, and clash of civilization, global warming, scarce resource, starvation, and water issues. So we have to balance, at least affluent society, we really have to invest to addressing these issues, not only in domestic issues, but more accountable to the global issues. So I think that would raise more like corporate social responsibility, like intangible asset of a nation. That's become a sort of very core value of each nation. So that's how much you're contributing, addressing to this global issue.
So Dr. Kirikawa, come back to your human capital point for a moment.
Yeah.
The government's role in nurturing human capital for science and technology.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Do you offer scholarships? Do you have free universities? What do you do?
I have been pushing very hard because the Japanese university, at least leading university, are so sort of closed and just only Japanese only type of university. So that I've been very much pushing to open up particularly undergraduate education, give a lot of scholarship, because it will be paying off eventually, because human network and providing a lot of opportunity to foreign students, and particularly from developing countries, would be a foundation of national security. Because in this globalized world, we have to really appreciate the changing paradigm of heterogeneity, diversity, and adaptability. But in the past, through 1950s to 1980s, I mean, Japanese system had worked very well because this industrial economic growth paradigm could be based on the conformity. But now I think we have to shift it, but I think there's a certain resistance to it because we have such a successful model. So like all the leadership went through this system, so just I try to change it, but there's a lot of resistance. I mean, that is the spirit of innovation. You have to be an out-of-box sort of disruptor. You have to keep talking about this and pushing this. I have been doing that.
Minister Wang.
因为刚刚讲到了教育的课题，几个月以前我还是校长，我曾在同济大学担任了同济大学的校长，在座有很多朋友我们都那个时候就认识。我认为呢，随着经济社会发展的变化，特别是在一个创新型的社会当中，我们需要的学生的质量的变化，是要随着企业的需求而变化。这也就是说，在高等教育当中，作为政府在引导高等教育培养学生的时候，要让他们更多的有机会接触企业的发展，让更多的学生能够及早的到软件公司到去进行实习和锻炼，要让学生自己有创造自己实现自己的创新的 ID 的这样的可能。那么这个呢，是我们当前在教育上面，特别是在面向企业发展的教育方面所需要做的改革。这并不是说过去不成功， 而是今天发展的社会需要我们走一个新的模式。Thank you.
Thank you. The next two gentlemen from the private sector here are giant leading high-tech companies. So I want to hear from you, and I know you have some strong views about transformative technology, but before we get to that, if you could just close off this part about the role and the delicate balance, and from your point of view, where it works and where it doesn't. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Vineet Nayar, who is president of HCL Technologies. Mr. Nayar.
So, the best way to look at this subject is to unclutter our thinking on this subject. And I would say two words which are very critical as we think through our views on this subject. One is the issue of relevance. The other is the issue of velocity. First is that different countries are faced with different challenges which will result into different things being relevant for them. What is relevant for America is definitely not relevant for India. What is relevant for India is not relevant for Japan and China. So the relevancy factor is very, very important, and that is where government suddenly definitely plays a big role in defining what is relevant, whether health is relevant, hygiene is relevant, science and technology is relevant, economy is relevant, commercialization is relevant. What is relevant? And there, in the relevancy factor, government is supposed to have the vision in defining the relevancy. The second is velocity. Velocity is that even if you conceptualize that, let's say, healthcare or education is the big relevant chapter for your country, how do you create velocity in executing to that challenge? And there is where I believe that if the government steps into the execution part of that strategy, there is where we lose the velocity. The velocity comes largely from commercialization of ideas or commercialization of directions. So whether we talk about the human capital challenge, if you privatize human capital, and therefore the economy is the fact that if you create good students, then they will get larger salaries, and they are privatized. If you go to good schools, you have to pay more to get into the good schools. If you create an economy around privatized education, which is not there even in India, you create better colleges, and that is what we have been talking about even in India. The fact that the education standards are not high because privatization has not seeped in India in education in a big way. Commercialization to create velocity is very, very critical in the way we think this through. The other critical issue is that the infrastructure, and I really appreciate the points being made, when you create giant infrastructure, for example, if agriculture economy is what you want to increase the productivity of agriculture economy, then the satellite infrastructure which has to be created has to be the vision of the government, and they have to make the investment. Or if you want to create science and technologies and developing new seeds, that has to be the vision for the government. But why is it that the development of those components and tools and technologies have to be part of the government-funded institutes or government-funded colleges? They lose the velocity. Why can't government behave like what I call an investor capital or a venture capital and saying this, because the government gets funding out of the people's taxes, right? So we are a shareholder into the government, and the government as venture capital makes those investment decisions that this is great for our country, and therefore we will make these investments. Now, once they make the decision of making the investment, that they should retain themselves as venture capitalists, which is governance, which is taking decisions and making sure that their money is well spent, the execution should go into the private sector. And with this combination, I believe that we will be able to achieve the relevance and the velocity.
So you are comfortable with the government, in your case, the government of India, making venture capital decisions in a macro, an enormous level?
I believe so, largely because if they don't make it, then why do we need a government? So we have to suffer our own government. So we better choose the right government who can make that visionary decisions, because that is the structure of the society. They're supposed to be the visionary, so instead of saying we should bypass them, I believe through election of whichever process, we should change them so that we have the right people doing the right job rather than saying, I will do your job.
So in your personal experience with HCL, where have you found government's role most helpful?
So government, exactly what is happening in China. The way the Indian IT industry really came is government set up these tax-free parks. And they set up this infrastructure and saying, hey, you guys don't have to pay tax. We'll set up this infrastructure. We'll give you so much facilities. Go and start the industry. So we went and started the industry. Then government set up these centers where everybody coming to India, they started propagating knowledge economy. And then they started privatizing the senior education. The engineering colleges got privatized, so we started getting good capital of people. So the government contributed significantly in the germination of the idea. But had the government become an IT company themselves, then we would have had a disaster.
Right. So as incubator, as pain reliever,
That's
when
true.
it comes to tax, great role to play. What if the government went a step further and chose which sector or which subsector they would back for an industrial park? Are you okay with that, or do they not have that expertise?
Yeah, so like all governments, none of them are perfect. They're far from perfect. So they did try and do that. But very clearly, the moment they quickly ran out of cash in terms of investment, once the industry becomes big, then the industry's investable surface is significantly larger than government's investable surface. So whether it is biotechnology or IT or which part of IT, they did not interfere. But had they interfered in making choices, the entrepreneurship would have not taken up and the velocity would have not gone there. But if you look at where government failed, which is Indian government failed, which is with reference to the relevance part of it, what has happened on agriculture productivity in India? Bugger all. What has happened on, what has happened on healthcare in rural sectors? What has happened on energy conservation on rural sectors? What has happened on water supply in rural sectors? So when you take those sectors of relevancy, yes, HCL and IT are standing examples and standing beacon of hope for India, but is that the most relevant thing which is happening in India? And there is a lot of economy in the rural side, which could do with a lot more investment, a lot more energy, a lot more innovation and commercialization and velocity. And I believe there is where we have failed as a country.
Okay, thank you for that. And now I'd like to come to Mr. Weigui, who is chairman of a very large high-tech firm here in China called ZTE Corporation. So, Mr. Ho, tell us where you see, from what you've heard so far, and from your personal experience in building this high-tech giant, what has been working in terms of a public sector role and intervention, and what is changing or what should be changed?
我觉得刚才主持人谈到这个问题，很有趣，就是说政府的这个定位，既不能走向一个极端，就是什么都不管，也不能在另外一个极端，就是说，这个控制得非常严，什么都是由政府来控制，所以这个平衡点确实是非常的重要。那么从我们这个企业的发展，我们这个总部是在深圳。那么深圳是中国开放的一个前沿城市，所以发展的比较快。我觉得这个深圳这个环境这个商业化这个环境呢，在当时80年代，相对于这个咱们国家其他城市相比呢，它就是比较一个宽松的环境，那么使得企业呢能够得到比较快速的发展。当然，这个我觉得刚才我们这个中国政府和日本政府的领导这个在这一方面的发言，特别我们的部长万钢这3点意见，我是非常赞同的。就是说，这个我们的这个平衡点究竟有没有问题呢？我觉得这个还是需要不断的进行调整。比如在中国，这个很多的方面是吧，往往是从一个极端走向另外一个极端以前是什么都管，后来呢就是更多的强调商业化在很多方面，这个也不会能够使这个行业呢能够得到这个很健康的发展包括咱们有一些像这个医疗行业，那么完全做商业化，对这个全国的这个老百姓呢就会造成很多的是吧这个医疗方面的困难教育方面也一度呢也有这样的问题。强调教育的商业化那么在我们这个高科技的领域里面，同样也有这种问题。那么比如说我们现在强调政府对这个高科技企业的一个支持这个孵化器这一方面，我觉得很多城市还是做得比较好。但是这个有一个敏感的问题，就是说这个市场就是说这种科技型企业的市场那么我们像中国、印度这些国家，这个应该说在这些方面，相比于西方、欧美来讲，那么还是有一些差距。那么这个差距的情况，就是说这个我们应该怎么样的应对 对这个市场，我们能不能是吧有些倾斜？我觉得这是很关键的问题。这是在 WTO 的框架下面，每个国家根据自己的国情有一个战略性的一个统筹。我觉得这个问题是一个政府是一个很难解决的问题，也是一个很敏感的问题。
Thank you very much, Mr. Ho. Now, I'd like to move the topic here, unless you have questions about the roles and striking the balance. If you do, pop them up now. It's fine. We'll jump in. Here's one. Let me come to you over here. Excuse me. Sorry. Thank you. Just tell us who you are, your name, and where you're from.
Okay, may I speak Chinese? Yes. Okay.
Yes, you may be.
All
Speak
right.
Chinese.
Okay. Yeah, I'm from Alcan. 我从那个加拿大旅业来。我有一个关于气候变化新技术方面的问题，想问各位嘉宾，特别是万部长。因为现在在这个世界上，这个气候变化问题非常的引人注目。在前2天，现在在悉尼正好在开 APEC 领导人会议。那么在这之前呢，也有一个 APEC Business Advisory Council、APEC 工商咨询理事会。在这个会议上呢，大家谈了很多关于新技术解决气候变化的问题。那么很多人认为政府应该在这里面承担更多的责任。那么因为新技术，我们也要既要考虑到保护这些技术发明人的利益，又要平衡公共的利益。那么今后在气候变化方面相关的这种新技术的使用上面，政府有什么办法来平衡这种利益关系呢？好，谢谢。
我尝试一下先回答您这个问题。这个 global warming 就是气候变化，确实也是今天中国政府最关心的一个问题。可能大家还记得，就是在6月初的时候，中国政府作为第3世界国家的第一个提出了应对气候变化的国家方案。10多天以后，科技部正式宣布了中国应对气候变化的行动专项。我们将对气候变化的科学问题、气候节能减排的技术问题、人们适应气候变化和防止灾害的问题，以及公众的宣传上面来进行加大力度的投入。在上一个5年当中，中国在科技研究方面，在应对气候变化和节能减排的，已经投入了25个亿的人民币。在去年和今年，已经投入了40个亿的人民币。在今后的3年当中，我们大概要投入将近100个亿的人民币，来攻克这些技术。我们支持新能源的开发，支持节能减排技术的开发，和支持生物技术的开发，和各种预防这个各种各样的灾害的情况。刚才您提的那个问题，就是政府怎么样来支持和鼓励私人开发的积极性，同时又能够保证这些开发的技术能够能够传播开来，能够为社会服务。所以我们认为，对于面向未来的技术，比如说中国政府和在座的日本政府以及印度政府一样，参加了国际核聚变的这个研究的计划 ITER 计划。前2天刚刚就是中国人大通过了这个计划。这在今后的35年当中，要投入几十个亿来研究核聚变，为人类创造一个未来的能源。这是政府的责任，这也是政府应该做的事情。但是对于一些比如说生物技术怎么样用在环境保护上面，怎么样培养出新的生物质的能源，这些呢，我们支持一批创新型的企业去开发它。那么刚刚公布的就是这个科技进步法的中国科技进步法的 这个讨论稿当中也明确的规定，除了具有重大的公共利益的这样的科研课题以外，一般的科研课题，它的承担研究的结果都为承担者所有。这个呢，已经和世界上基本上是同步的。那么从政府的角度上说起来，我们支持新型技术的开发，支持它的应用，在它还没有进入市场，还没有具有进入市场的能力，还没有进入竞争的时候，政府可能会投入更多的精力来支持，在研发的各个阶段来进行支持。但是，一旦它进入了市场，开始了竞争了以后，我本人认为，政府就应该退出，让企业来自由的发挥。啊，当然，政府还会在政策，还会在这个贷款啊等方面给予一定的支持。谢谢。
Thank you. We have a couple more questions here. So just on a recap on that, the government's role there was taking the big risk in emerging technologies, the big capital risk that the private sector can't or won't make, plus the support of some of the entrepreneurial ideas and services. And if I heard the minister right, he said that they actually would own those with one exception, where if it was too overwhelming a need for the general public, I think, if I heard the minister correctly. Yes, your name and where you're from.
Thank you. 谢谢主持人，我是来自中国新京报的记者 China Business。我有2个问题想特别请教那个万部长和那个侯董事长。就是中国是作为世界工厂而著名的，但是我们可以看到，就是现在的资源和环境各方面的问题已经不允许那种粗放的方式存在。那这个时候，因为中兴它是走过了这条路，从一个中国的那个企业，然后变成一个逐渐慢慢变成一个世界知名的通信企业。那然后从那个国家的政府的那个政策层面的引导方面，就包括科技进步法，包括一些方面，那科技部会给中国制造这方面的它的将来的附加值的发展，它的科技的方向有没有一些政策的支持？另一方面，也特别想请问一下那个侯董事长，就是中兴在成长过程当中是怎么用自己的科技或者说其他的力量成长为一个世界性的通信企业的？谢谢。
先请何董事长吧，您先。
那么我想就说我们这个公司也经营了20多年，应该说在这个过程中，就是首先要靠企业自身的一种发展的动力，因为中国应该说在高科技发展方面一个最大的这个优势就是人力，刚才谈到人力资本人力资本中国是应该说在全球和印度一样拥有最多的人力资源。那么如果能够把这些人力资源挖去能够很好的发挥作用，这是企业能做好的关键是关键。我想我们现在一直在这个方向在努力，现在我们已经有4万多名员工，其中3万多名都是技术人员工人只有1万名。那么我想这一点呢，这个今后我想在政府的这个教育这个事业，我们国家现在这个教育还在不断的扩大，每年这个毕业生高等的毕业生已达到500多万。那么这个我想对我们国家未来的科技的发展是最根本的基础根本的基础。那么包括这个从制造像科技中国的制造呢会带来很多的是吧环境能源资源的这个这样一个短缺。那我想这个在科技方面的运用能够大大的减轻这一方面的这个挑战，能够赢得我们在这个方面包括环境方面的迅速的改进谢谢。
我也尝试简单的回答一下您所提的问题。经过了将近30年的改革开放，中国的经济发展到一定的程度，也是在政府和企业的和全国的共同努力下，那么中国现在成为了一个制造大国。那么实际上制造业的转移也是一种世界的潮流，也是一个全球化的一个必然行动。为什么会转移到中国来？ 我们也要必须看到中国的现实。我们中国尽管实行了严格的这个人口政策，但是每年我们新增人口将近1000万，也就是说，中国政府有责任每年创造800万个新的就业职位。因此，接受世界制造的转移也是中国政府的重要的责任之一，也是它的策略之一。但是，制造业的产品尤其制造业发展到现在的程度，确实对中国的资源、中国的能源、中国的环境造成了很大的影响。那么，作为科技的作用在什么地方？就是不仅我们承担着双重任务，不仅要发展高新的科技，比如说 IT， 比如说生物，比如说新材料、纳米技术等等这些新的技术。同时，我们还承担着改造传统的工业的责任。因此，我们在这几年的科研的重点，我们明确地放在改进现在的制造工艺，促进企业进行节能减排，发展循环的经济，使我们的工业结构变得更加合理。作为一个制造业的大国，一方面要为世界的因为现在世界上确实中国出口的东西很多，也为世界的发展做出自己的贡献，但是也要承担自己的责任，就是我们在节能减排的完成我们约束性的指标的同时，要改造我们的企业，使它有更新的工艺，更加节约能源，更加环境保护，这也是科技进步的一个重要标志。
Now, I'd like to change gears for a moment and move on to some of the cool technology, some of the disruptive technology, and what you see coming out of Asia, as opposed to necessarily coming out of the West into Asia. So with that, Mr. Nair, I know you have some strong views about what's relatively useful in terms of technology and what may be hugely disruptive or useful and disruptive to the West. Tell us a little bit more what you mean by that.
So, when we look at science and technology, the broad agenda, in my belief, is that most of the products developed in the West are over-engineered.
Over-engineered.
Over-engineered. The reason they are over-engineered is because the cost of manpower and availability of manpower or human capital is scarce, and therefore they engineer their products in such a way that it does away with that cost. When you come to India, the same product may not be relevant because the manpower cost is the lowest cost and the material cost is a higher cost. And therefore, for Asia, what is relevant is the same material should be costing 1/10 the price for it to be relevant for mass consumption. You take a ticket of a Bollywood movie in India, it is 1/10 of a ticket when you see it in US and Europe. If you take example of a prosthetic limb, for example, if you want to change your limb, it should not happen. But if it happens, you pay about $40,000 in US and Europe to get that done. You get it done about $100 and $150 in India. Now, the products between these two countries is not the same, right? But the 40,000 prosthetic limb, which comes from US, has no relevance for a mass community in India or China, wherever it is, because most of the people can't afford it. And therefore, you have to re-engineer those products so that they are relevant for that factor. And if you take prosthetic limb, the only negative of this $150 or $100 one is every month you have to come and get it fixed in terms of the screws have to be tightened. That's okay. That's not such a big issue from our society perspective, but it seems to be a big issue from the developed countries. Now, you take burners, you take gas, conservation. Now, gas conservation tools within the emerging economy are very, very relevant because the gas price is A, high, B, it is in the whole budget, constitutes about 5% of your total budget. In US, it does not. And therefore, most of the products which you see in the US have to be re-engineered. So that is one disruption which I see, which will come into this country, into the Asia-Pacific region. The second thing which I definitely see happening in this place is largely the intellectual capital on science and technology is Asian. whether it is number of PhD students in US universities, whether it is number of Nobel Prize laureates, whether it is, if you go into NASA and the number of Asians who are working in these science and technology labs. Now, when the marriage between the opportunities which are presenting themselves in Asia and the intellectual capital which is in Asia and working outside gets married, you're going to have disruption of new technologies for new markets and new relevance of new geographies which are going to come up. And IT is leading the way. So if you look at the IT products and packages which are now coming out of India and Japan and many other places outside India, they're really happening. The R&D centers of most companies are moving towards Asia, and therefore most of this innovation is coming out of Asia. So where will that disruption lead us? These two kinds of disruptions are first going to change the way Asia does business and change the way Asians live their lives. And secondly, this disruption and this technology is going to become so pervasive and so relevant that they're going to start inching their way back into the developed countries and saying finally they are relevant in those economies. And that, it's a 10-year window, but that is what I see as the role of science and technologies in Asia and the relevance of it.
So low-cost innovation in technology that disrupts the over-engineered, very costly technology from the West. Now, Dr. Kurakawa, you're agreeing with that, but Japan has been, if anything, the great over-engineerer, right? Japan creates things with so many buttons on the toilet, I don't know what to do with them. So is Japan vulnerable to this? And what industries are vulnerable to this in the West? What would you say is next in terms of a hit list of disruption of lower-cost innovation in Asia?
I think that has a certain point. I think recently Economist published Economist Intelligence Unit has a three-part report, which really represents sort of a new paradigm reflecting of the sort of industry sort of growth driver. Part 1, personalization. Part 2, collaboration. Part 3, innovation. And they examined all the parameters of many various countries compared, and fortunately or unfortunately, they reported innovation. Japan was ranked #1. So but I think it seems very weak in collaboration, personalization, right? So, but if innovation, like so much technology intensive, but you have to deliver. You have to deliver to the target customer, which could be, as you stated, it's right. Why you have to have such a high tech? Because you really have to have a captured, targeted market or consumers which could be distributed different parts of the world. That's become a very flat world. And one way to capture certain affluent society, that's a part of branding. And so like Swatch, what kind of image you have Swatch? Now they have a flagship store in the center of Ginza in Tokyo a few months ago. And I wasn't sure what is Swatch. I mean, just Swatch gives you a fancy but not so expensive different kind of watch. But when I walked there, I was amazed. I never heard of such a different brand, but so expensive, like $200,000, like $100,000 watch. Have you heard of this name? I never. But according to this high-end watch company, apparently, like more than $100,000 watch, wristwatch, each month, Tokyo, #1 sort of sales. That's the reason. So I think that's the target market, and just somehow branding is very powerful. But
so forgive me for interrupting, but you're saying cheap is not going to be a disruptive force in Japan.
Right, sometime, right. That's right. But also, like, we have to have a lot of targeted audience so we could transfer and collaborate with different partners.
If we go back to a hit list for a moment, which industries in the U.S. which are now predicated on high-priced, over-engineered technologies are the most vulnerable to what you described, Mr. Nair? If you could list 2 or 3 industries.
So the biggest is the medical electronics industry. So dialysis machines,
medical electronics, you said.
Yeah, medical electronics, right? So that you are already seeing significant movement in Asia in a different direction. So that's one kind of industry which is undergoing a big transformation. The second is automobile industry, which has already happened in front of you. The automobile industry in Asia is standing on its own 2 feet, right? It's, whether it is coming out of Korea, whether it is coming out of China, whether it's coming out of India, a 1 lakh rupee car coming out of India is the second area of industry where you're already seeing lower cost availability, which is coming out. Third is new mode of transportation, bicycles. I mean, you see it in China, you see it in India. It's disrupting the way you travel. It's redefining the way you travel. Now, is that going to get adopted in a different scale and form? It may get adopted worldwide. The other areas where you're seeing is software engineering. Software, you don't notice it, but if you go into Boeing, if you go into Airbus, if you go into use any of the electronics which are happening, any of the mobile devices, where is it getting done? Where is the innovation getting done? It is all getting engineered in one of the Asian countries. So the entire IT sector has moved, medical electronics moving, automobile is moving. A lot of those disruptions you're already seeing happening on the way.
Great. With some of the time we have left, since you are 4 people steeped in science and technology, we'd like you to flash forward and give us a picture of the coolest technologies you see coming. What do you see only developing now that we're not as up to speed as you are? Give us a little glimpse of what you think are the most exciting, coolest emerging technologies. And if we start with Ho Xiansheng, Mr. Ho.
我们这个行业主要是做通讯，那么将来跟这个老百姓关系最密切的就是在通讯方面的这个带宽。如果宽带在增长这个2到3个数量级，那么大家在这个互相沟通过程中，这个就充分的利用这个图像的信息。我相信这一点呢，这个用不了几年时间是都能实现的。
So the bandwidth application, big bandwidth applications. Mr. Ho, go with that for 1 minute more, because we've all heard about big bandwidth and video. Tell me a little bit more. Tease me a little bit about what some application or emerging technology related to bandwidth.
带宽的技术现在是在这个很快的速度在往前发展。那么技术上呢，这个突破还是应该说是不需要很长的时间。那么各个国家可能就是在这个标准方面，而且是这个在这个频率的分布方面安排频率方面这个一个制度，可能要取得一些共识。那么这样在全球各个国家这个沟通方面就会更方便。当然，有些大的国家像中国、印度，它自己国内的这个老百姓的这个沟通啊，这个是更重要一些。那么这个制度就容易建立起来。那么我想这个技术呢，这个比方说移动通讯这个固定网的通讯，那么这个在第3代已经开始应用了。那么第4代这个每一代的这个带宽呢，可能就速率呢要增加1到2个数量级。那么这样将来这个在图像这个传递过程中、沟通过程中就非常的方便。
So paint a picture for me or for my daughters more likely. I have 2 daughters. Paint a picture for me how their life will be better because of what you just described. How would their life be improved because of what you just described?
You know, the real fault lies with the panel.
Use his microphone, please.
So the real fault lies with the panel. The very fact that you have science and technology and no business guy sitting is the problem with our science and technology. So what is going to happen? I think what's going to happen today, I mean in future, and we are working very extensively, therefore I have some personal knowledge on what's going to happen, is the fact that today we have to learn technology, right? Tomorrow technology will learn us. So what we call the experiential technology. So whether you are seeing it in form of Web 2.0 today, something which Google is doing, something which everybody else is attempting on the mobile phone, you see a little bit of that in Apple, but not the experiential technology. Tomorrow you will not have to understand the mumble jumble of technology, and therefore when you talk about science and technology, you will have the business guys sitting here and not people who understand technology. And technology will start learning, and therefore the emphasis will be on experience rather than the technology which goes into it. and what kind of experience you create for the consumer. So for your one daughter, the experience will be different. For your other daughter, the experience will be different. They'll still fight. You know, I can't solve that. But
You know them then.
I know what happens at my house.
So when you say about, this is an interesting concept, so give me a scenario now where the technology is learning me. I get it that I don't need to think tech. I won't need a manual. I won't even need to think about it. It will just deliver an experience. So take an experience today which is perhaps difficult with technology and one that I won't think about that will enrich my life because it learns me.
So let's take two extremes. Let's say easy one, which is the television, right? You have to go and search for programs today. And the fact that you have been using the same television for 40 years, the television is so stupid.
You know my television too.
Your television doesn't learn anything from the 40 years of experience. Now, if the television were to learn your pattern, the 9 o'clock, most likely things you are seeing, I mean, if there was an experiential creation with the television, then the moment you switch on the television, it asks you three things.
Which we have now, right? We have TiVo and the hard
So
drive.
that's what I'm saying. Now I'm going to try and make this more complicated.
Okay.
You go into an ATM machine. The moment you go to ATM machine, most of the stupid ATM machines, you used to space 5 transactions before you get your stupid $100 out. Now they have come up with something very stupid, but it works, saying your favorite transaction. So you press on your favorite transactions, out come $100. That's experiential. Now, so that's the other progress which you make. Now let's get into more complicated. You try and do web search. Now you still have to type the same stupid words which you type every time. You get to the same roll downs, and you have to click through. Why do you have to do so much click through? So if you want to, for example, talk about Dalian experience, you want to search that out, I can guarantee not before 10 clicks you will be able to get into that. Or you want to understand what is happening in China on the fusion technology, which is, I'm very interested in. I'll go to the web and try and click through and find out what exactly is happening in that area, not less than 10, 15, 20 clicks. And then I hope in hell I can get there. Why should that happen? If that is my area of interest, 1, maximum 2 clicks I should be able to there. That is the emphasis between information availability and experiential information, so that I can quickly get to the experience, and the experience in the computing platform start learning my behavior, my interest rates, and start flushing in. It's like buffers in memories, right? That's how it started. The buffer started so that you can easily get into the buffer instead of going to the hard disk. That's how memories got created. So it's a similar, memories are like experience. They'll start building on themselves and start giving you an experience rather than getting worried about clicks and things like that. That's a radical change which is going to happen.
Thanks for that. Dr. Kurokawa, tell us what you see as the coolest emerging technology.
I think whenever we talk about technology, we are so much stuck on technology, but whatever you deliver have to really capture the mind of your customer. That means you have to use the right part of the brain. So that means iPod and iPhone is a typical example. It's not a technology, the design and concept. So Stephen Jobs is presenting a concept which captures the mind. So what makes you happy is a different thing. There's so much suffering in the world, and one is obviously energy and the education opportunity, but energy. Let's use, why not, like quantum dot, like solar energy. We're utilizing such a fraction of solar energy, even from biofuel. But let's say quantum dot or something which may take another 10 years or so, and quite sort of widespread and commoditized, so that we don't need to worry about global warming. Everybody can use that, even Africa, like a rural area of India. Everybody has access to water energy from solar, so that somehow water and food and everybody become happier. I mean, that's what is technology has to deliver. So we really have to think about your customer, and that makes them happy.
So again, the design, the emotional side.
Oh yeah,
of
I
science
like to
and
be
technology.
happy.
Minister Wan, what do you see as the most exciting technology coming?
从我个人的经历上说起来，我当过农民，当过工程师，也当过教授。我想每个人在不同生活的时候，不同生活的阶段，生活在不同的区域，会有不同的最酷的技术。对于生活在农村的孩子，他需要最好的教育，他要去买一个计算机，会花很多的钱。但是如果大家想一想， 我们的 Windows 上面所提供的所有的功能，在座所有的人都认识、都知道，有10%你能用上吗？也就是说90%你用不上的，你买来了。如果我们让这些农村的孩子们去买到他净花10%的钱，去买他10%的需要的东西，会有更多的孩子受到更好的教育。我认为这就是最酷的技术。如果我们坐在城市里，我们觉得出门行动不方便，城市的排气、烟气很大，是污染源。我认为最酷的技术，就让我们未来城市的人出行的时候，都坐上燃料电池汽车，坐上电动汽车，使他们能够享受零排放对他们生活带来的恩惠。我想这就是对我们城市里面生活的人最酷的技术。顺便说一说，也许明年的2008年的奥运会，各位就会在奥运会的场馆里边享受到我们自己开发的电动汽车和燃料电池汽车。对于我前些日子到了中国西北的高原，各位可能在中国的东部比较多，对于中国的发展很惊讶，觉得很现代化。中国西部的高原地区既寒冷又缺少氧气，那儿生存的人怎么让他能够吃上新鲜的蔬菜，怎么让能够取暖，就是最酷的技术。我们的科技人员在这种高寒缺氧的地区，把制造生物biogas 的制造沼气的装置安置在塑料大棚里，使塑料大棚里边的这个生长的蔬菜为生产沼气提供氧气，使太阳能的温暖导入了塑料大棚，而生产沼气的沼渣又成为生长素菜的肥料。这种技术可能是最简单的技术，对于在座的各位上说起来，但对于这个地方生活的还在相当贫困的农民说起来，它就是最酷的技术。所以我想，作为中国的科技，要想到的是让更多的人在不同的阶段上享受他认为最酷的技术，因为这是科学能够为他提供的技术。谢谢大家。
Final question for you, and it is actually going to be no words to respond. I would like you to do this if you agree, this if you disagree. Are you ready? The question is, imagine 10 years from now in Asia, we no longer are concerned about pollution because technology has begun to solve the problem. If you agree with that statement, 10 years from now, we will no longer be as concerned about pollution because technology will have solved the problem. If you agree with that statement, thumbs up. If you disagree, thumbs down. Up, down. Oh, no, no, no!
我想说
A
的
hedge
是，
strategy.
我相信10年以后我们会有技术，但是我相信这个技术只有在座所有的人，或者在亚洲所有人都去应用这个技术的时候，才能够真正的达到我们今天。所以我这样举，就是如果我们大家都来用这个新技术，它就这样了；如果做了新技术大家都不用的话，就变成这样了。
Okay. 他们说很聪明，你明白我讲吗？什么？ Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking the panel for being good sports. And thank you for your time.